Hey guys, Doug here again with Big Red Pen Editing, and this time around we have something a little different than our normal quick fixes. Today we're going to look at active and passive writing, and we're going to keep things a little more conversational than normal. So let's start off with what is active writing and what is passive writing. Active writing is the voice that you normally write with. You can make up basic or complex sentences with it as long as the subject, which is the noun that is doing the action, is actually performing the verb. If there's an object in the sentence, then the subject is performing the verb on the object. Passive writing, on the other hand, is when the verb acts on the subject. Rather than the subject doing something, we're being told that they have done something. There are a couple of ways to identify it, but let's look at some examples first. With active writing, again, the subject is performing the verb. So, examples like, Ali walked my dogs is an example of active writing. Ali is the subject, walked is the verb, my dogs would be the object. Kat drives her car. For the fifth time today, Dan lost his phone. Those are all examples of active writing. Now let's look at examples of passive writing. Again, passive writing is when the verb acts on the subject rather than the subject using the verb to act on the object. So if we take our examples from before and make them passive, then they would sound like this. My dogs were walked by Ali. The car is driven by Kat. The phone was lost by Dan for the fifth time today. Do you notice how in the third example especially, it's unclear whose phone was lost? We could say his phone was lost by Dan, but that wouldn't make much sense. We could say Dan's phone was lost by Dan, but that just sounds bad. So there are some natural advantages to active writing just in the structure of the sentence alone. Now, when do you use active or passive writing? 99.9% of the time, you're going to be using active writing. Active writing is widely seen as the stronger type of writing compared to passive writing, simply because it's more concise. It's stronger in that the subject is actually doing something, so it drives that pace forward, and it's just easier for us to read. Especially if you're writing blogs, articles, social media content, anything informative or anything that's considered copy, then you want to stick to active writing because active writing keeps the reader engaged and it drives them towards the end of your copy, which is already hard enough. But you want to use every tool in your toolbox to keep them reading. If you're writing a short story or a novel or a play or a poem especially, passive writing is acceptable in very, very small quantities. Again, active writing is always considered to be stronger, but there are some uses for passive writing. So now, if you are a copywriter or a blog writer or a professional business writer, I want you to stop listening for a little bit because this is only applicable to people who can use passive writing in their work effectively. So passive writing can be used to change up the pace of your writing. A lot of the times when you're using active writing, it ends up being X does Y. John goes and sees Sally. Sally eats sushi. When you use passive writing, you can change up how your reader is actually reading your work, and that's effective for prose and for those more fictional or even non-fiction works that are dramatic. It can also sound more lifelike when you use passive writing, because we're not all perfect. Sometimes we use passive voice when we speak in normal, everyday conversations. And so when you implement that into dialogue or thoughts or narration into your work, it comes across as more lifelike sometimes. If you use it too much, it comes across as annoying and people will put down your work. So be careful when you use it, but it has that potential to sound more realistic. It also sets the mood. As I mentioned before, you can't use this in professional writing because it's too long, it's too wordy, it's too muddled, but you can kind of implement that into creating a more dramatic mood. Think, Shakespeare, think the older works, the classics. A lot of them use passive writing because A, it was more acceptable back then, and B, it creates a more dramatic situation for the reader. When they have to slow down their reading, they have to think about what they're reading and really paint that picture in their own head. So again, if there's something that you take away from active and passive writing, it's that you want to stay active most of the time. And in fact, unless you're an extremely strong writer, try to avoid passive writing at all costs. Personally, I use passive writing, but not intentionally. So I let my own proofreading or another editor tell me, hey, this is passive, you have to take it out. and I switch it for active, and the writing becomes immeasurably better. So always try to stick with active writing. Now, if you want to look through your own writing and see if you're using passive voice or active voice, you can identify passive writing looking for a few keywords. And those words are usually auxiliary verbs, which we'll get into in a quick fix next week or the week after. But the big three that you're really looking for are is, was, and were. When you see those, normally you'll have the verb acting on the subject. Not all the time. There's a lot of times when is, was, and were can be used in active writing. Big red pen is awesome. That's an active sentence, and a very true sentence, but an active sentence. So another word that you can look for to identify passive writing is by, by. And if you go to our website and the blog associated with this video, we'll have the link in the description. There's a worksheet there and you can practice your skills. But you'll notice that almost every example of passive writing has the word by in it. If we go back to our examples from before, my dogs were walked by Ali. The car is driven by Kat. The phone was lost by Dan for the 5th time today. Every time it's something was done by the subject, and that's an easy way to identify it. Again, it doesn't happen 100% of the time, but it is more frequent than looking for is, was, and were. So that wraps it up for a discussion on active and passive writing. If you want more practice, again, head over to our website. We'll have the link in the description. There's a reference sheet and there's a worksheet added to the library of resources there. I think we're up to almost 15 pages of different resources for you to use, all free, of course. If you enjoyed this video, if you like this format, drop a like and subscribe to Big Red Pen for more ways to improve your writing. Again, this was Doug with Big Red Pen. Thanks for stopping by and happy writing.